Chapter 73, Because I Trained Every Moment, 2. The assailants' methods were eerily similar to those of common thieves. Their primary weapons consisted of black-painted daggers, crossbows, and throwing knives. Really now? However, their skills were inferior. They aren't even on the level of the Gilpin Guild, Ingrid thought. Dodged it. The astonishment in their voices when Ingrid evaded their daggers was enough to betray their lack of professionalism. Assassination clearly wasn't their forte. Ingrid grabbed a dagger from the hand of a fallen assailant and spun it deftly in his palm. Adjusting its position with a flick of his fingers, he gripped it between his thumb and forefinger, then extended his arm in one fluid motion. The action yielded immediate results. With a sharp thunk, the thrown dagger buried itself in the forehead of one of the masked attackers. He collapsed backward, his head striking the ground with a dull thud as crimson blood began pooling on the inn's floor. Ah! Terrified screams erupted from a few patrons who had been eating their meals. They fled the inn, while the innkeeper's assistants dove beneath the tables for cover. The attack brought chaos and panic, but not a single scratch was inflicted on Ingrid's party. "Kill them all," one of the attackers yelled. "An ambush! Fight back! Grab your weapons!" The caravan's guards quickly took up arms in response, their swords hissing as they were drawn from their sheaths. Listening to the clamor, Ingrid remained acutely aware of his mission. "I'll handle this," he informed the ferry company commander, turning on his heel. Someone needed to secure the safety of their charge. If there was chaos on the ground floor, the upper floor was likely no better off. While close guards had been assigned, the situation here would inevitably become their responsibility as well. Whoever orchestrated this must be utterly insane, Ingrid muttered as he made his way upstairs. The attackers were foolish to assault a caravan guarded by an armed force stationed at the border. On his way up, no one stood in his way. This was thanks to Jackson. He had grabbed a chair and wielded it like a shield, blocking every incoming dagger with ease. Before long, the chair resembled a bizarre work of art, studded with knives and quarrels. When projectiles failed, some of the attackers approached with short swords or clubs. Jackson dispatched each of them with a single, precise stroke of his blade as they entered his range. His movements were immaculate. Although his swordsmanship seemed ordinary at a glance, none of his opponents managed to block his strikes. Clang! One attacker narrowly deflected his blade, but Jackson had anticipated this, following up with a lightning-quick thrust that pierced his opponent's face, shattering his nose and creating a gory wound. Jackson withdrew his sword and resumed his grim work. He used the chair to block incoming daggers and slashed at anyone who got too close. While his throwing skill surpassed Ingrid's by several magnitudes, there was no need for such finesse in this situation. "What the hell is this guy?" one of the attackers cursed. Jackson didn't bother to reply. He saw no reason to converse with those who were about to die. The ferry company commander took advantage of the distraction Jackson created, stepping into the thick of the assailants. She drew her leaf blade, and as it danced, attackers began clutching their throats and collapsing. Slash after slash, blood spattered the air, painting her face and clothes with crimson. None of the attackers could match her graceful yet deadly movements. Their group lacked anyone capable of countering her skill. "If this is all you've got, I'm disappointed," she said, balancing on one foot while raising the other slightly off the ground, her blade poised as if ready to begin a deadly dance. Though her voice was clear and cheerful, to her opponents, it must have sounded like the call of a grim reaper. One masked attacker involuntarily stepped back, cursing under his breath. "Damn it!" The leader of the attackers, observing the chaos, came to a conclusion. As long as the objective is complete. They had stalled long enough. Whether or not their mission on the second floor was a success, lingering here any longer would mean certain death. The caravan's guards were far more skilled than he had anticipated, almost as if they had brought killers from the frontier. He didn't need to know more. It wasn't his concern. "Kill them all," the leader shouted before making a break for the exit. His plan was to escape while his subordinates bought him time. To him, the mission was already a success. "Glory to Aspen," one of the remaining attackers cried, their voice fading as the leader fled. They were remnants of spies planted in the city. While the rank and file sacrificed their lives for the mission and their country, the leader was in it purely for the money. That's what loyalty was meant for, after all, to be wielded at moments like these. Jackson watched the leader's retreating figure with mild interest, his hand briefly moving toward a thin blade concealed at his waist before reconsidering. "It's not worth it," he thought. Killing the man wouldn't change anything. Letting him go wouldn't cause any major consequences, either. Shrugging off the thought, Jackson returned to his task, slaughtering the attackers who dared to challenge him. He stood at the stairs leading to the second floor, ensuring no one could pass. Though it wasn't a role that suited his usual demeanor, he fulfilled it with ruthless efficiency. None of the attackers could best him, as his skill was second only to the ferry company commander in the inn's main hall. Despite her relentless assault, the commander occasionally glanced toward her squad. Among them, one member stood out, not Ingrid, but the squad member holding the line at the staircase. Impressive, she thought. The so-called troublemaker squad lived up to its reputation, boasting a member who even outshone their leader. Such cases weren't unheard of, but in this instance, the disparity in skill was striking. At least city level, she mused. While different regions measured skill differently, village, city, or continental level, she found the categorization familiar from her wanderer days. Was this someone capable of making a name for themselves in a village? Or someone whose skills could bring them renown across an entire city? To gain fame across the continent, what level of power is required? From her perspective, a continental-level powerhouse would need to be at least knight class. Without mastering the power they wield, it's impossible. Of course, excluding con artists hiring bards to spread false tales. Interesting, she murmured. To those she had ambushed, particularly one man who had just lost 4 fingers on his right hand trying to block the daggers, it was a cruel remark. What? Tears streaming down his face, the man stared in disbelief. The ferry company captain silently struck the back of his head with the pommel of her dagger. Thunk. He collapsed. Should she stop the bleeding? No, it wouldn't matter. Let him live or die, either way, it was irrelevant. There were plenty of mouths left to testify. Not everyone had been killed. Jackson, too, had spared a few. Among those spared were those who seemed young or loose-lipped, left incapacitated with slashes to their thighs or knocked unconscious. Even the one who had first shouted Aspen was kept alive. They could be useful later. What about above? While fighting, the fairy threw part of her focus upward. Her heightened senses picked up the situation above. A strained smile spread across her face. How amusing. The thought came again. It reminded her of the first time she wielded her daggers as a child. She had felt this exhilarated back then, too. With that thought, her blades moved again. By now, the number of attackers had been halved. Ingrid ascended the stairs 2 steps at a time. Each step felt light beneath him, his movements almost effortless. Isolation technique. Though Audin claimed it was slow, Ingrid could feel the difference, it was clear as day. His body felt lighter, more responsive than ever. As he reached the second-floor corridor, an assassin armed with a blade dropped from above. This one was less skilled than the assassins he had faced before. Their presence was almost tangible, allowing Ingrid to sense their approach. In the narrow corridor, he twisted his body and pressed against the wall, evading the assassin as they crashed to the floor. The fallen attacker looked up, their gaze meeting Ingrid's. Ingrid gripped his long sword in his right hand, bending his knees slightly into a ready stance, middle swordsmanship's unsheathing posture. The assassin regained their balance, holding their short sword vertically in a defensive stance to block a horizontal slash. It would have been an excellent defense against a middle swordsmanship and sheathing strike. But against the vertical slash Ingrid executed with the short sword hidden in his left hand, it was utterly inadequate. Thunk! He feinted with his right hand and stance, then split the assassin's skull with the short sword in his left. It was a dual unsheathing maneuver, a Valin mercenary blade technique. The assassin's eyes trembled in disbelief, but they couldn't utter a word. Dead men tell no tales. Are you insane? Hiring assassins here of all places. A woman's voice rang out. Stop right there. Another woman's voice followed. Ingrid leapt over the corpse and sprinted down the narrow hallway. A room door, slightly ajar, came into view. Standing before it was a masked figure. Idiots. The figure saw Ingrid charging toward them and flicked their hand. A throwing knife whistled through the air. Compared to a whistle dagger, it was laughably slow. The heart of the beast granted Ingrid courage to face the incoming blade directly. His pinpoint focus slowed its trajectory in his perception, allowing him to read its path with the sensitivity of his blade sense. Combined with his reflexes and muscle memory, he simply tilted his head to the side. A feat unimaginable before this repeating day. Back then, he could only dream of dodging like this, purely acrobatic in nature. In the past, he had failed to dodge an arrow on the battlefield and had to raise a shield. Now, he felt confident he could evade even that arrow. The knife whistled past his ear, and Ingrid continued forward. The assassin, wide-eyed, moved to throw another blade. Feigning another charge, Ingrid lifted his right arm in a sweeping motion. Whistle! The sound of a whistle dagger echoed as it pierced the assassin's neck. Goo! Blood spurted from their neck as foam bubbled from their lips. Reflexively, the assassin completed their motion, but the dagger they threw dropped harmlessly to the floor. Dodging and throwing all happened in a few heartbeats. Ingrid didn't slow, slamming his shoulder into the dying assassin and sending them crashing into the opposite wall. Thunk! Crash! The impact rattled the door behind the assassin, eliciting a startled cry from within the room. This was an inn. Of course, there were guests. Though it wasn't broad daylight, this was still the heart of the city. For someone to attempt an ambush here, they either had nerves of steel or were utter fools. Bastards! Ingrid muttered as he charged into the half-open room. The moment he stepped inside, he saw a guard collapsing, stabbed in the stomach. The masked assailant turned their blade toward the guard's charge, a young woman of the merchant caravan. In that split second, Ingrid hurled another whistle dagger. Whistle! Thunk! The dagger struck its target, disrupting the assassin's attack. It hadn't been a full-strength throw, but it served its purpose, creating an opening. Ingrid closed the gap with a swift charge. The assassin ignored him, swinging their weapon toward the merchant's heir instead. Persistent bastard! Cursing internally, Ingrid mimicked a move he'd seen a squire use on the battlefield. He couldn't replicate it perfectly, but in this small, confined space, a crude imitation was enough. Lowering his stance, he pushed off the ground, closing the distance in one explosive movement. Instead of throwing another whistle dagger, Ingrid lunged, interposing himself between the blade and its target. Thunk! The assassin's blade struck his back, cutting through his gambeson and slicing into his lower back. Grimacing, Ingrid twisted his body to deflect the blade. The merchant heiress stood before him, not wide-eyed and pale as he expected, but gritting her teeth, her expression resolute. This was his duty. The mission was everything. Ingrid endured the pain, silently thanking Odin for his lessons. Thanks, Odin. Learn to take a hit, that's the first step, Odin had said. Body movements that let one deflect even the sharpest blades. It had felt impossible during training, but now, it was saving his life. Stay back! Ingrid ordered, pushing the heiress aside. The woman bit her lip but obeyed without a sound. She seemed tougher than expected. You bastard! The assassin, wielding a gladius, glared at Ingrid. Let's take this outside, Ingrid said, turning to charge once more. The assassin lunged, aiming for his forehead. Ingrid evaded, crouching low, and grabbed the assassin's leg. With a burst of strength, he lifted and charged toward the window. Crash! The wooden frame shattered as they both tumbled out of the second-story window. Chapter 74, Every Moment Was Training, 3. Even though it was the second floor, it wasn't particularly high. Still, falling from that height with the weight of an adult man, coupled with the armor he wore, was practically a suicide attempt. Ingrid shoved the assassin with the crown of his head and balanced himself mid-fall. The sudden tackle left the opponent defenseless, and with a thud, both of them hit the ground, bodies tangled. Ingrid landed on top, while the assassin lay beneath him. Cough! The assassin spat out blood upon impact. Rising and brushing off his opponent, Ingrid exhaled deeply, checking his own condition. No injuries. No joints or ligaments were damaged. That was good enough. The first priority of a bodyguard was to create distance between the assassin and their target. The path to the second floor was blocked by Jackson, and the remaining minor issues would be handled by the ferry company commander. As he assessed himself, Ingrid also realized his back had no injuries. He had somewhat accounted for taking the opponent's blade head-on. Armor. The armor was a treasure he'd acquired when raiding the Gilpin Guild, its true value recognized by REM. Seems like it won't tear under most slashes. Yep, with such rare beast leather, make good use of it. The one who left this lying around without wearing it must have been out of their mind to die like that. Originally, the chest storing the armor was cursed, and the deceased guild leader had been unable to remove the curse, merely keeping the item. For some reason, the curse didn't affect Ingrid, and now it allowed him to deflect his opponent's blade without shedding a drop of blood. However, even though the armor could block sharp metal, it couldn't completely absorb the impact. For that, Ingrid was grateful to Odin. The isolation technique had shaped his body, teaching him wrestling to utilize it effectively. With the skills honed through countless training sessions, Ingrid had protected himself. Every moment of training, repeated over and over, made such feats possible. Avoiding the blade and subduing his opponent, all of it was the result of not wasting a single day. If he had neglected even one day, would this moment have been possible? No. He could say that with certainty. You're insane. The assassin, blood staining the mask over his mouth, pulled it off as if it was suffocating him. Ingrid didn't recognize the face, which was unsurprising given the 5,000-strong population of Border Guard. How could he know everyone? Still, the man's face seemed vaguely familiar, like someone he might have passed by. Cough. The man coughed again, blood spraying and staining his beard before dripping onto the floor. Even as he spat blood, his glare remained fixed on Ingrid, brimming with killing intent. Screech. Ingrid drew his long sword. The assassin unsheathed a gladius in one hand and a short sword in the other. Dual wielding. Despite spitting blood, the man's stance was perfectly balanced. His internal organs were likely damaged, but the fierce light in his eyes remained unyielding. This was a man who had experienced the battlefield. Ingrid's instinct screamed as much. His face bore signs of age, suggesting he was well over 30. Surviving that long on the battlefield meant he probably had a hidden trump card. He's likely to use a peculiar sword technique, Ingrid thought. It wouldn't be standard swordsmanship, something odd and unexpected would come his way. Ugh, phew. The man cleared his nose of blood with a sound akin to a pig's grunt, then spat out the mixture of blood and mucus before asking Ingrid. Which unit are you with? Why do you want to know? If you're in the standing army, you might be my junior. Junior? Ingrid's expression showed doubt, though his eyes never stopped scanning the man's entire body. The man's stance was solid, leaving no obvious openings. I was a squad leader once, the man added. Ingrid believed him but didn't let his guard down. After all, there were countless reasons men left the army, some as cripples, some dead, some discharged after causing trouble. Few left intact. Those who did often had reasons like serving as an alternative to prison and choosing to be discharged once their mandatory service ended. Are you with the slaughterers? The man asked again. Ingrid lightly shook his head, answering only to bait a mistake from his opponent. But the man's guard remained steadfast. He's good, Ingrid thought, subtly lowering his sword's tip. Noticing the shift, the assassin adjusted the positions of his weapons in response. A formidable opponent, Ingrid's instincts and reason both confirmed it. Finally, the man said, exhaling. The dizziness has passed. I'll kill you and the woman upstairs, then leave. His tone was casual, as if picking up a coin from the ground. Ingrid didn't respond. There wasn't time. As the man spoke, he charged. Fast. The gladius and short sword danced in chaotic yet deliberate movements. Left and right, each hand moved to a different rhythm. Valin-style duet. Ingrid recognized the technique. Though he lacked the talent to attempt it himself, he had studied it. Two blades moving to different beats, each aiming for lethal strikes. The man's footwork and swordsmanship were both top-notch. Ingrid gripped his sword with both hands, lowering the tip to his left hip as the man rushed in. Seeing this, the assassin's eyes gleamed. But Ingrid remained composed. The heart of the beast granted him courage. Valin-style movements were unpredictable, but not undefeatable. Tap. He stepped forward with his left foot, moving to his own rhythm, unaffected by the assassin's. The two blades carved arcs through the air, aiming for him. Before they could land, Ingrid moved. Your strength is exceptional, Odin once begrudgingly admitted, despite criticizing everything else about Ingrid. Strength and heavy sword techniques were the keys to shattering Valin style. Whomp. The longsword slashed horizontally, its blade forged with Valerie steel cutting through the air, and more. Thunk. Splatter. A mid-level horizontal slash. Technique met force. Countless sparring matches had honed this strike, and Ingrid's training had greatly expanded his range of skills. What he couldn't see or sense before, he now perceived through the heart of the beast, the sense of the blade, and pinpoint focus on the tip of the blade. He internalized these observations, drilled them into his body, and rebuilt himself using the isolation technique. Dodging the daggers with a mere tilt of his head was no coincidence. This time, however, he swung his sword with intent. Using his crafted body, he twisted his muscles and swung from his left foot as a pivot. The entire process unfolded in an instant. The blade that split the opponent's torso had nearly cleaved them in two. The opponent had attempted to block with one sword and counterattack, but their skill was crushed under sheer strength. A complete victory of brute force. Ingrid gazed at the one whose body was partially severed, hot steam rising from spilled entrails. Farewell, senior. Despite being half severed, the man demonstrated a remarkable tenacity for life, his eyes brimming with lingering regret. He trembled, muttering words through quivering lips. Ingrid read the shapes formed by his mouth. For the glory of the homeland. Was it all loyalty to the country? Was that what had driven him to assassination? He didn't know. But it seemed worth verifying. Swinging his sword to shake off the blood, Ingrid sheathed it with a sharp shring. Only then did the ferry company commander and Jackson emerge from outside. You fought quite theatrically. Jackson's gaze swept over Ingrid's entire body. There didn't seem to be any visible injuries. Only minor scratches from breaking through the window. If you were my lover, this much would be expected. The company commander uttered savage words in her usual blunt tone. Others might misunderstand if they overhear, Ingrid replied, flustered. The sequence of his words came out reversed. Is that so? The commander brushed it off casually. Did you capture any of them alive? Yes. Nodding at Jackson's report, Ingrid stepped inside. On the first floor, several individuals had already been restrained. Scanning the surroundings, he noticed that few of the merchant caravan's escorts were present. Some must have been killed. The attacker's skill level. Not particularly high. But that was by Ingrid's standards. For ordinary merchant caravan escorts, they would have been formidable foes. Most notably, the last opponent he killed was a retired soldier. A couple of amateur mercenaries wouldn't have stood a chance. Where had such a group come from? The question arose naturally. On the first floor, the target of their escort, the young lady of the merchant caravan, had already descended. Blood and corpses littered the surroundings, some of the bodies belonging to their own side. It was the middle of a battlefield. Over 20 attackers had participated in the ambush. More than half of them had been killed or captured by the company commander and Jackson. Several members of the caravan were retching nearby. It was understandable. The pervasive stench of blood, corpses, and spilled entrails was overwhelming. Yet, despite the carnage, the young lady merely furrowed her brow, appearing composed. She approached, her boots clicking sharply. What's your name? She stopped in front of Ingrid and asked. He pointed to himself with a finger. When she nodded, Ingrid spoke. Ingrid. Are you all right? She gestured toward his back as she asked. Ingrid nodded. He owed it to his leather armor. As REM had said, it wouldn't be cut by a mere slash. He had quickly assessed his opponent's skill and decided he could block it with his body. Had the circumstances been different, he would have used another method. Perhaps he wouldn't have recklessly blocked with his body, but at the time, it seemed the best choice. Good. I'll see that you're compensated later. He hadn't done it for any reward. It's fine. It was my duty. The woman pursed her lips a few times before finally speaking. Leona. Yes. He already knew her name. After introducing herself, she glanced around, took a deep breath, and exhaled slowly. Ensure compensation for the families of the deceased. Yes, milady. A trembling nanny approached to respond. She seemed more shaken than Lady Leona herself. The vomit clinging to her lips indicated she had already been sick after surveying the scene. She consciously avoided looking at the ground. In contrast, Lady Leona. She's composed. Was she surprisingly indifferent to such things? No, it was her resilience. Or perhaps she had prepared herself. Ingrid observed those cleaning up the scene before withdrawing. Leona did not speak further. As Ingrid moved toward one corner of the inn, he noticed the innkeeper's distressed expression. This must have been the first time he had encountered something like this. Ingrid couldn't help but wonder what kind of madman had orchestrated this attack. For the glory of the homeland. Rumors of Aspen spies within border guard had circulated. The presumed ringleader escaped. Jackson spoke from the side. "Why didn't you capture him?" "Why would I? He was here to guard, and guard he would." That was the proper attitude of a dutiful soldier. Jackson conveyed his point through both words and demeanor. Incrid didn't reprimand him. It was better than bringing REM or other squad members into this mess. "Well done. 2 days remain." Jackson's comment reinforced their focus on the mission. Duty was duty. His words were correct. "Still, I'm curious about who's behind this." The incident had occurred in the early evening. As darkness fell, the air reeked of blood. Most of the remaining guests packed up and left the inn. As the innkeeper's face contorted further, Lady Leona spoke. "The caravan will cover your losses." She spoke with her back turned, exuding confidence. She didn't seem like a frightened bird. She was composed. She must not have grown up sheltered in a caravan. Incrid silently observed her retreating figure before asking, "Are we staying up all night, Commander? Would you like to?" "No." "Then take shifts." "Rest first." "Yes." Without hesitation, Incrid headed upstairs. As he ascended, he clenched and unclenched his hand. How skilled had the opponent he killed been? At the very least, they were as capable as the stabbing maniac he had encountered earlier on the battlefield. Since he had forced his opponent into injury by falling from the second floor, they had fought with a disadvantage. Their insides were damaged. Their limbs must have lacked strength as well. Still, the brilliance of victory was not dulled. I would have won even if they were at full strength. Confidence, something he had barely possessed since birth, began to sprout within him. Though he might continue walking like a turtle, his steps would be different from before. Incrid felt he had taken a step closer to his dream. It was a small, almost invisible step, but it was progress. And that fact alone filled him with satisfaction. "Thanks for saving us." One of the escorts descending the stairs addressed him. "If we hadn't requested help from the border guard." The female escort's complexion was pale. She had been responsible for guarding Leona up close. Despite having a hole in her abdomen, she was already walking. Was she eager to die? It wasn't deep. Barely missed the vital organs. Sensing his gaze, the escort spoke. "That's fortunate." After an awkward exchange of glances, Incrid passed her and continued upstairs. "Thank you again." The female escort repeated. Incrid accepted it indifferently. It was something he had to do. That was his duty and his mission. Incrid rested for half a day and woke up early in the morning. Shift change, squad leader. The commander's call came. He was already awake, though. The commander, Incrid, and Jackson shared a single room. Taking turns sleeping wasn't an issue. After all, they were soldiers before anything else. Even with the border guard's escort, an attack had occurred. And that attack had led to this. Outside the inn, 2 squad-sized units were dispatched. They belonged to the 2nd Company. "I'll kill whichever bastard is behind this," one of the confident platoon leaders remarked. It was said they had taken the captured attackers with them. Incrid descended alone. Despite efforts to clean up, the hall still carried faint traces of blood and an unpleasant odor. The dim glow of candlesticks illuminated the empty hall. There was no one else. The few remaining guests had long since moved to other inns. The result was a deserted main hall. Incrid claimed a table and sat down. He began reflecting on the day's events. It was a habit for him. Even without repeating today, this was a regular part of his routine. As he reflected and engaged in light training exercises that could be done while seated, dawn broke. Just before sunrise, someone descended the stairs. "You're up early." It was Lady Leona, the escort target. Chapter 75, The Enigmatic Squad Leader. The candelabras affixed to the inn's hall walls flickered weakly, their flames barely clinging to life. No guests around, perhaps an attempt to save on candle expenses. The dim shadows this created stretched Incrid's figure long across the floor. Throughout the early hours, he had been practicing the sense of the blade. The quiet interior, the sound of soldiers standing guard outside, the faint clink of a drink being poured by the person under his protection, Incrid sharpened his senses, focusing completely. He listened while simultaneously honing the edge of his awareness. Detecting presences, counting the people nearby, gauging distances by the cries of nocturnal birds in the far-off distance, he reflected on the range he could perceive. If it's within 5 paces. Within that range, he could read even the slightest presence. He could hear the soft rustle of clothing. Yet, a thought lingered in his mind. Is this truly achievable by sound alone? He recalled the conversation between the ferry company commander and Jackson right before the ambush. The two had already anticipated the attack. How had they managed that? Surely not by relying solely on their ears. He resolved to ask Jackson later. If it was something that could be learned, he wanted to master it. This time, it wasn't a wall. By now, he doubted he'd face another similar event with the same lack of readiness. Yet he didn't entertain the thought of recklessly repeating today's mistakes to trap himself in the present. Ingrid remained steadfast. For the sake of tomorrow. He always moved forward, refusing to be trapped in the present. The crackle and pop of a log snapping in the fireplace sent embers flying. Amid his reflections on battle, random thoughts flitted through his mind. Ingrid, resting his chin on his hand, thought about the people he had killed. Glory to the homeland. Could this have been Aspin's spy unit? What was the mastermind, capable of mobilizing such a force, thinking when initiating such a scheme? What was their goal in causing this level of chaos within Border Guard? Would there be another ambush? Would they break through the 2 squad formations, or perhaps send an assassin? As these questions crossed his mind, he thought catching the one who fled might be easier than expected. At that moment, Leona descended the stairs. You're up early. I'm on duty, so it's a shift rotation. Ah, I see. Leona nodded and approached. The remnants of last night's event still lingered on the floor. She seemed to be trying hard to maintain her composure. Ironically, such efforts likely only heightened her awareness of it. Focusing on something else might have been easier, Ingrid knew this from experience. Is this your first time at Border Guard? Pardon? Oh, yes. Didn't Big Eyes mention that this woman's personality was rather peculiar? She seemed composed, possessing a certain resilience, but hadn't yet shown the unhinged tendencies of someone like REM. No, wait. Comparing anyone to REM is unfair. That would be impolite. There are many legends about the Penhaniel River. Have you heard the tale of the sword forged from its waters? Minstrels' tales often stirred the heart. Ingrid had memorized a few such stories. Not only were they good conversation starters, but they also helped pass the time during duty. Right now, it was nothing more than idle chatter to him. But to someone hearing it for the first time, it might have felt fresh. Please, tell me. Leona's interest was piqued. She nodded with a smile. Despite it being a trivial tale, Leona listened with bright eyes, responding with smiles and enthusiasm at intervals. And so, while there was a brief trend of forging swords from river water, none ever summoned the river spirit, as the legend claimed. You're a good storyteller. I've been told that. Even REM had admitted that no one could provoke others with words as well as their squad leader, Ingrid himself. As Ingrid nodded at the thought, Leona suddenly spoke. Would you like to join me? Ingrid tilted his head and asked back. Pardon? Where? She was still his escort target. Even though the inn was now under the control of 2 squads due to the earlier ambush, leaving it empty, his mission wasn't over. There were still 2 days left on her request. Wherever she went, following her was his duty. I'm inviting you to leave Border Guard with me when it's time to depart. The sudden suggestion felt well prepared, carrying the subtle air of someone accustomed to managing others. Calmly seated, her red lips parted. Come with me. Her confidence, born from the belief that her offer was superior, was evident. Leona genuinely thought so. What kind of place was the Rockfried Trading Company? Though it lagged slightly behind larger trading companies like the Rengardis Trading Company, it held considerable influence in the local region. They had dealings with groups like the Shepherds of the Wilderness in the northernmost reaches of Penhaniel, the Black Leather Guild, a hunting collective capable of capturing even wyverns with sufficient preparation, and the Glacier Rangers, a group living deep in the mountains, at one with nature. Their core trading partners were these 3 groups. Moreover, the Rockfried Trading Company possessed maps enriched by the travels of their predecessors across the Penhaniel. These trade maps, Rockfried's most treasured assets, detailed the specialties of various regions and the fastest routes, making them invaluable treasures. Stealing and selling such a map would provide enough wealth to last a lifetime. This was the kind of company Rockfried was one anyone would covet. Especially if they were of the bloodline of its predecessors, they might see it as rightfully theirs. Such thoughts likely spurred yesterday's bold ambush. To draw a sword here, of all places. It enraged her. Why did they have to act so brazenly now? Though she shared no blood with the predecessors, she worked tirelessly to honor their legacy. Why did the other side disregard it all? Yes, if not for their legacy, she wouldn't have come this far. And what was that legacy? Before killing or being killed, try to reach an agreement first. Will you do that, Leona? The predecessor, someone who raised her as a daughter. But also someone she could not easily call father. Neither the company nor my bloodline. This legacy was one she could not abandon. Leona understood the predecessor's heart. He had raised her to grow the Rockfried Trading Company, yet could not entirely abandon his own bloodline. That was why she found herself here now. At the border guard of Norillia, the final bastion of negotiations without drawing swords. If not for the will of his predecessor, the succession struggle would have ended long ago. And now, an ambush in such circumstances. To think of drawing swords at the border guard? Fools. That was the conclusion of his scattered thoughts. The man who had saved her in her moment of peril came into view. The first thing she noticed was his eyes, reminiscent of a lake, those blue eyes. They were so captivating that they seemed almost imbued with magic. Black hair, blue eyes, and a body honed through training. And on top of that, a handsome face. It was natural to feel intrigued. Truly a fine appearance. Moreover, his skills were extraordinary. The way he had stormed into the room and subdued the enemy in an instant. And what about his personality? A man who sought nothing in return. After rescuing him, a single word, duty, had made Leona's heart race. It started from that moment. She wanted him. She wanted to take him with her. I promise you a better position and better treatment. Ingrid had no reason to hesitate. After all, hadn't he already served as a guard for a merchant guild? If his sole purpose was simply to earn krona, that wouldn't be too bad. Living as the sword of a growing guild could be a reasonable path. But he had a dream, a path he was walking, even if slowly. He had no time for distractions. No, thank you. His hands rested on his thighs as he sat upright, his back straight. A clear response given with unwavering posture. It was best to be firm when rejecting offers, experience had taught Ingrid that. Leona's pupils wavered slightly. Clinging to someone who said no is unbecoming. At some point, Jackson's voice came from behind. I see. It's unbecoming. The Fairy Company commander's words followed shortly after. Is that so? Leona neither raised her voice in anger, showed irritation, nor snapped. She simply nodded calmly. You're satisfied with your current position, then? That wasn't entirely true. It was just that from here, he could see the path to climb higher. Sigh, business really is tough. The innkeeper, who had appeared unnoticed, sighed heavily. The blue light of dawn was gradually giving way to the golden hues of morning. It was morning. We'll cover the damages from the guild. Leona spoke again, as if it was a natural follow-up to her initial offer. Oh, that would be wonderful. The innkeeper, wringing his hands, responded eagerly. Leona nodded as she watched. Don't worry. Some guests will arrive by noon, please prepare for them. Understood. She seemed accustomed to giving orders while seated. Soon after, a nanny came down from upstairs. Leona excused herself, saying she needed to rest, and left. Jackson then approached Ingrid and spoke. There are plenty of pretty women in the city, don't go messing with the Merchant Guild's successor. He hadn't. He had rejected her. Ingrid had plenty of experience dealing with interested women. His face wasn't exactly forgettable, after all. And a well-trained body was always a magnet for attention. Ingrid, high-ranking soldier. It was the company commander. From her usual spot, with the same posture and tone as ever, she called out and asked. Are you prone to womanizing? No. Do you flirt with every woman who crosses your path? No. I see. Yes. It was undoubtedly a joke. A joke, surely. But her expression remained deadly serious, her gaze unnervingly calm. That made her hard to deal with. I wish you'd stop this now. Understood. The commander nodded. Hoping to catch his breath, Ingrid stepped outside, where a squad mate from the 2nd Company, 3rd Platoon, greeted him. "If you flirt with every woman, what happens to people like me?" That was supposed to be a friendly comment, right? "Who are you talking about?" First the commander, then Lady Rockfried. "Wow, you're irresistible, aren't you, squad leader?" The one marveling at him was the platoon leader, someone he had crossed paths with before during various missions. "It's nothing like that." "Of course, it isn't." "He says it isn't." "He insists it isn't." Several soldiers echoed his words in unison, almost like a chant. Apparently, being stationed to surround an inn in the city wasn't keeping them busy. They seemed bored enough to entertain themselves with gossip. Though there had been no further ambushes and no signs of one either. While he could understand their boredom, "I'd prefer it if they didn't use me for their amusement. Rumors could be dangerous." As expected, it wasn't long before new rumors spread. When Creyas arrived at the inn, he said, "So, I heard the squad leader slept with the merchant guild leader in just one day? How did you manage that? Even I'd find it hard." Lady Rockfried is known for her high standards and prickly demeanor. She's not prickly. "Oh, come on. If you're here, then get to work." "Who?" Ingrid decided to cut the nonsense and gave Creyas a task. Clearing up misunderstandings wasn't worth the effort. Creyas was teasing him knowingly, anyway. One of the ambushers escaped. Find him. The one who had fled, it piqued Ingrid's curiosity. The Aspen spy who had died by his sword had shouted about the glory of his nation as he fell. But to let the mastermind behind this plot escape? That wouldn't sit well. He must pay for his actions. That was the natural order and the right thing to do. It was also a matter of justice. And it wouldn't be long before the unit received formal orders to track him down. Letting him roam freely wasn't an option. If you orchestrate something, you should take responsibility. Leaving your subordinates behind and running was unacceptable. Given that he had revealed himself as an Aspen spy, releasing him was not an option either. Understood. With the guilds of the night operating in the city, finding one person shouldn't be too difficult. More krona flows in each time, anyway. With the money he planned to save this time, he considered upgrading to a proper short sword or guard sword as his secondary weapon. He had found the guard sword particularly appealing when he used it before. Ragnar had also suggested he try using a shield, but it hadn't come naturally to him. If necessary, he would learn, but his specialty lay in utilizing his strength. It's better to grip the sword with both hands and swing it. But having a shield on the battlefield is an advantage. That was Ragnar's advice. As a light infantryman, Ingrid was proficient enough with a shield. The military strength lay in a standardized force rather than exceptional individuals. 2 skilled swordsmen in a 10-man squad couldn't match the strength of a uniformly trained squad. Standardized training included group formations with shields, something Ingrid had diligently practiced, though his improvement had been slow. It just doesn't feel natural. That was his thought every time he held a shield. Like wearing an ill-fitting suit, it felt more natural to wield his sword with both hands. Using or not using a shield, if he ever became someone who could break the rules of standardized forces, it wouldn't matter much. Not long after Creyas left, a man with sullen cheeks and about a dozen soldiers arrived. Among them was a figure who stood out, a man with slanted eyes and drooping arms. He carried a slender, long rapier at his waist. He looks fast. That was the impression he got immediately. The man made no effort to hide himself. It seemed to stem from confidence. I use a fast blade. But knowing that won't help you stop it. His posture and demeanor seemed to convey that message. The man with cheeks puffed in displeasure was named Pollard, a rival to Leona in the succession struggle. Upon entering, Pollard took a seat at a table and said, "Hey, bring Leona here." The hate was directed at Jackson. Naturally, Jackson ignored him. Chapter 76, The Carmen Collection. "Hey, are you deaf? You with the auburn head." Jackson ignored the comment again. Watching this, Ingrid thought it was fortunate that he brought Jackson along. What if it had been REM? "Are you talking to me now?" Accompanying the words would probably have been a flying axe. Jackson, on the other hand, simply ignored the provocation. That was a relief, though the person being ignored would undoubtedly feel otherwise. "You bastard, I'm Pollard Rockfried." "And so what?" Jackson's eyes conveyed his thoughts clearly. Fortunately, before things escalated further, Leona descended the stairs. Leona arrived with her nanny and greeted them with a radiant smile. "You're late." "Late? What about that guy you brought along as a guard? What's he even doing?" "You sent him, didn't you?" "Who?" Leona walked gracefully toward Pollard, cutting off his complaints with a question. Pollard tilted his head, confused, wondering what she meant. Then, Leona's hand cut through the air. Smack! "Wow!" Ingrid admired it inwardly. Without any warning, Leona delivered a crisp slap across Pollard's face. The swing was clean, and the impact was solid enough to leave him speechless. Pollard, his head turned to the side, glanced at Leona with wide eyes. "You said it yourself, you crazy bastard." Leona's clear and delicate voice rang out. Ingrid reconsidered his earlier thoughts when talking to Kreis. That woman wasn't just sharp, she was downright ruthless to others. Clang! The sound of weapons being drawn echoed through the hall. While Ingrid didn't draw his weapon, he positioned himself behind Leona. Jackson stood by his side, and the ferry company commander remained silently in place. "You crazy bitch! Do you want to die?" Pollard clutched his stinging cheek as he finally managed to speak. "If anyone's dying, it'll be you. Do you even know where you are? Did you think you could just spend money and employ troops here without getting caught?" Ingrid watched with growing curiosity. What was all this about? It seemed things were about to get very interesting. The inn at Border Guard sometimes served as a venue for guild meetings. Since the troops didn't have official barracks, the inn business thrived. That was why this group had gathered here. The innkeeper, guarding the hall, widened his eyes at the unfolding scene, an unexpected slap followed by drawn weapons. Even someone as experienced as the innkeeper looked troubled. After a few moments of thought, he made his decision and turned toward the kitchen. He'd given up. The man was wise enough to know he couldn't stop this and had no intention of getting involved. Luckily, all damages here would be compensated under the name of the Rockfried Merchant Guild. That's why he remained calm. As he retreated into the kitchen, the innkeeper shot a glance at Ingrid. "This won't get too out of hand, right?" Ingrid, familiar with the innkeeper Alan, gave him a subtle nod. Leona wasn't reckless. She wouldn't allow things to escalate into a full-blown fight. Despite the tense atmosphere, this commotion was all there would be. "You're so stupid. That's why the previous leader didn't entrust the guild to you," Leona said. She appeared completely unbothered by Pollard's protests or his threats of force. Her entire demeanor radiated confidence, as if daring anyone to lay a finger on her. Ingrid found her attitude fascinating. Bold. How should he describe this? She had a knack for cutting off any chance of resistance or response. "Do you even know where you are? Say it." Grinding his teeth, Pollard growled in frustration but unconsciously answered. "Border Guard." "Exactly, you idiot. This is Border Guard. And you hired some back alley guild to do dirty work here? Even knowing I'm under the escort of Border Guard's standing army." "I didn't, no. I didn't know about the Border Guard escort until after." Pollard's voice faltered, his bravado crumbling under her pressure. His trembling hands betrayed his fear. Sheeing. Clack. A man standing behind Pollard partially unsheathed his sword but then slid it back with a click. The sound seemed to snap Pollard out of his stupor. He changed his tone in desperation. "I didn't do it. I'm being framed." Judging from the situation, the truth was clear. He must have planned his alibi before coming here. But the intense atmosphere almost made him confess everything. Click. Leona clicked her tongue, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Crossing her legs in her leather pants, she took out a cigarette. Fire. Her nanny brought a candlestick and lit the cigarette for her. "Sit down. Aren't we here to discuss succession?" This was the same woman who had caused weapons to be drawn. She exhaled a puff of smoke as if nothing had happened. Pollard dragged a chair noisily and sat as well. Starting a fight here would clearly not end in his favor. Did he not realize where the two squads outside were stationed from? The two began a heated discussion. They exchanged points and counterpoints, preparing their respective claims for succession. For Ingrid, it was a barrage of words he could barely follow. "You want to inherit the guild but can't even interpret the trade codes or decipher the maps. Have you memorized the guild's cipher language? That's something the steward can handle. Besides, I'm the legitimate heir. What right does an outsider like you have? The previous leader acknowledged my qualifications to inherit the guild. Are you saying you'll go against his decision? Claiming legitimacy by blood alone won't convince anyone when you lack the ability to lead. Ingrid listened with half an ear. Leona clearly dominated the conversation, both in tone and content. So, was the assassination attempt his last desperate gamble? Border Guard happened to have groups willing to take on such jobs. Was this clever planning or sheer stupidity? The two bickered for quite a while longer. From what Ingrid observed, Leona seemed to be using this meeting as an opportunity to mock Pollard. Are you really the son of the previous leader? You don't look like him at all. Makes me suspicious. What? Are you saying my mother might have someone else's child? Enraged, Pollard stammered and slammed the table with a loud bang. That's not what I meant. But if that's how you interpret it, well, what can I say? Leona exhaled another puff of smoke, completely in control. Was she always like this? Reserved and quiet, wasn't she? Who knew? They'd only spent 2 days together, and they'd exchanged fewer than 50 sentences. People were complex, after all. No one was simply one thing. This damned woman. Watch your mouth, you ugly bastard. You wretch. The man, who had held back even when his mother was insulted, reached for the short sword at his waist when called ugly. Seeing this, Ingrid lightly gripped the hilt of his sword. This was a place where the border guard ensured safety, and unsheathing a sword for a fight here was unthinkable. One of the reasons the border guard elevated the city's value was its guarantee of civilized discussions without resorting to violence, whether for merchants or nobles. Of course, backdoor dealings and assassinations still occurred, but drawing a sword openly. That was tantamount to requesting death. Jackson stood to my right, and the company commander observed from a step behind as if watching a show. I placed my hand on my sword grip, covering Pollard's bodyguard within my weapon's range. First step to the left. I would unsheath the sword and slash downwards at his crown. With no time to assume a proper stance, the draw and the strike had to be simultaneous. Pollard's guard, who was within my range, reacted. With a subtle motion, he extended his arm further. What kind of swordsmanship would he use? For a moment, Ingrid wished the man would attack. Logically, he knew it wouldn't happen, yet he couldn't help but hope. How fast is he? Was he faster than Rem's axe? Or the hybrid elf's whistle dagger? He wanted to experience it. To face it. To measure his skills against his opponent. This was pure competitive spirit, a burning desire to test his mettle. The heat of it coursed through his body. If the man attacked, Ingrid would strike him down. A strange tension filled the air between them. Meanwhile, Pollard broke out in a nervous sweat. His thoughts raced. Could he draw his sword here? Would he seem cowardly if he didn't? Leona despised people like him. If you're going to draw your sword, do it. If not, resolve it with words. If neither, don't even start. Without the last will of her predecessor, she would have avoided dealing with him altogether. The tense standoff rendered the inn eerily quiet. And then... thud! The sound of the inn's door being flung open broke the silence. The thick wooden door swung wide, striking the wall with force. The person who had burst in expanded Ingrid's field of vision. Both he and his opponent relaxed slightly, retreating half a step in unspoken agreement. What was I thinking? This wasn't like Rem, who would draw a weapon without regard for the situation. For a moment, Ingrid had nearly lost himself. He sighed inwardly and turned his head. A familiar face appeared, Torres, from the Frontier Defense Forces. Behind him were 5 others in similar attire, tunics over checkered brown leather armor, topped with dark brown coats adorned with eagle-crested shoulder patches. We are the Royal Frontier Defense Forces. We've come to arrest the instigator who hired Aspin's spies to stir up trouble. Eek! Pollard let out a foolish squeal. His bodyguard grabbed his shoulder to steady him. Ingrid found himself curious about their relationship. It didn't seem to be a simple employer-employee arrangement. You dragged Aspin's dogs into the succession battle. Torres' words caused Pollard to pale, but Leona remained unfazed. Who called the Frontier Defense Forces here? Ingrid silently observed the situation unfold. All present will be detained, Torres announced. Neither Pollard nor Leona reacted. Instead, A calm man with brown hair and a modest appearance stepped forward from behind Pollard. "Are you saying you'll detain people without evidence?" "This man is the heir to the Rockfried Trading Company. Surely you haven't been bought by the opposition?" His words, insinuating bribery, made Torres frown briefly before breaking into a faint smile. "Quite the cheeky bastard," he said, openly expressing his displeasure. But the man wasn't wrong. The reason a major trading company was discussing succession in Border Guard was precisely because the Border Guard standing army maintained strict neutrality. If trouble arose within the city, the standing army would inevitably intervene. But their commitment to neutrality meant that without solid evidence, they couldn't detain anyone, leaving them open to misinterpretation. A calculated move. The opponent had played their hand wisely. Torres, aware of this, couldn't simply cut down this cheeky bastard outright. A tense silence followed. Leona broke it. "Bribery?" "Of course not," she began, denying the man's implication. "Though it's possible someone from the company may have involved Aspin's spies," she added, prompting Pollard to flinch in shock. Seeing his reaction, even Incrid nearly sighed. He might as well confess outright. "We don't know yet, which is why I called the Frontier Defense Forces," Leona continued. "Who called them?" Incrid was genuinely surprised. Leona explained further. "Until this is resolved, I request both heirs be detained. We'll uncover the evidence in the meantime." She scanned the room. Her ability to steer the situation with a few words was impressive. "I heard there's a ringleader who fled. Let's capture him and have him confess." It was a checkmate, a gambit leaving no room for escape. Could the fugitive withstand interrogation if captured? The current detainees had all claimed ignorance, stating only that the leader knew everything. And that leader had escaped. "Very well, Lady Leona. But what if the fugitive doesn't show up?" Past the brown-haired man, now addressing Leona directly. "Then it wouldn't be the Frontier Defense Force's concern," Leona replied. "After that, it would become an internal matter for the trading company, and the major figures would decide the heir's qualifications." The brown-haired man grinned, understanding the implication. "Once they leave the city, could Leona handle Pollard's guards?" Incrid doubted it. "I'm a merchant. I don't ask for favors without compensation. Whoever captures the fugitive first will receive this." Leona produced a dagger, placing it on the table. A long, slender blade sheathed in black leather, a stiletto dagger. The Carmen collection. Someone recognized it. Incrid noticed Jackson stepping forward. It was rare for his usually stoic friend to react to something as simple as a dagger. Not that it lacked value. Unexpected. Carmen was a renowned assassin who had made his mark with custom-crafted weapons. While his assassination skills were notable, his craftsmanship was unparalleled. The weapons he crafted were known as the Carmen Collection, and the dagger Leona revealed was one of them, said to pierce and withdraw without leaving a trace of blood. "Why are you giving that away?" "This is mine." "A gift from the previous generation, Chief," Leona replied firmly, ignoring Pollard's protests. "It's whoever brings him in." A bounty had effectively been declared. Incrid couldn't help but marvel at Leona's cunning. She summoned the Frontier Defense Forces to buy time, declared a bounty to incentivize others, and ensured everyone gained something. Everyone except Pollard. Still, the reward was enough to set many eyes aglow. "I'll bring him in," someone declared unexpectedly. It was Jackson, volunteering confidently. Incrid nodded, surprised. Jackson rarely acted so decisively. He must really want that dagger. The task wouldn't be difficult. In this city, the underworld was controlled by the Gilpin Guild. Its leader, Craeus, was one of Incrid's subordinates. Incrid had already ordered them to keep an eye out, making the fugitive as good as caught. Chapter 77, 2 days to resolve. When bored, practice sparring. Torres summarized the situation. "Then, we'll stay here for 2 days. If the issue isn't resolved by then, both of you will be escorted to the unit. Once witnesses or evidence are collected, we'll address the matter accordingly." Pollard attempted to protest, but a grinning man on his side grabbed his shoulder, whispered something in his ear, and restrained him. Leona remained indifferent. "Fine." She nodded, seemingly unbothered, as if this was what she had been hoping for all along. Incrid, observing the unfolding situation, nudged Jackson in the side. The ever-alert Jackson intercepted the gesture with his palm. "What is it?" "You got a thing for collecting knives." This was news to Incrid. He'd never seen Jackson display such behavior before. All of Jackson's belongings in the quarters were standard-issue supplies. The man didn't even bother with personal items. "It's Carmen's stiletto," Jackson replied matter-of-factly, as though that explained everything. Incrid wasn't well-versed in such things. He'd only heard in passing that Carmen's collection was both famous and exorbitantly expensive. Jackson elaborated when he noticed Incrid's lack of comprehension. "Even with dozens of gold coins, it's nearly impossible to acquire." "Do you know who Carmen is?" The title of Master Craftsman isn't given lightly. A single blade from Carmen can spark deadly fights on the black market. A few years back, Carmen's third work, The Carter, surfaced and caused chaos among assassin guilds. Incrid didn't know the specifics, but the chaos Jackson referred to wasn't an exaggeration. Many professional killers lost their lives over that blade. It was later reclaimed by the continent's top assassination group, rumored to be the dagger of Geoga. The stiletto is Carmen's fourth work, Jackson continued. Carmen had crafted 7 unique blades, each tied to a story. First Kill, a pocket knife, used to murder a slave trader, Carmen's master, but was reportedly destroyed. Stick Sword, a thin and long cane sword, used to stab the soldier who violated Carmen's sister. Carter, used to kill the squire of the noble who led the soldiers. Stiletto, used to pierce the noble's heart. Hunting Dagger, used to slit the throats of the noble's followers. Sword Breaker, to shatter the noble's treasured blade, symbolizing the completion of Carmen's revenge. Invisible Blade, a weapon said to vanish in daylight. Its true purpose remains a mystery. Some speculate it was meant to kill Carmen himself, while others believe it failed its final purpose. "That's quite a story to carry around," Incrid remarked when Jackson finished recounting it in a calm, deliberate tone. Jackson responded with indifference. "It's not memorization, I simply know it." Incrid couldn't help but feel that Jackson had shifted the topic to avoid lingering on his enthusiasm. "Are you planning to sell it if you get it?" Incrid teased. "Why would I sell it?" Jackson retorted, his eyes unusually wide. Clearly, the stiletto wasn't just a treasure to him, it was a genuine desire. Incrid found it odd but didn't press further. He had always kept a respectful distance from the personal lives of his squad members. It was one of the secrets to his success as a unit leader. Across the way, Pollard's group huddled. A plain-faced man, a laughing scoundrel, and a swordsman with drooping arms whispered among themselves. The man with the rapier briefly locked eyes with Incrid before averting his gaze. Incrid's thoughts shifted. "He's someone I'd like to test myself against. This complicates matters." "A poor choice, it seems," said the swordsman, his tone dull. "Perhaps inevitable," replied the plain-faced man with a resigned smile. "Was it?" The swordsman's interest seemed minimal. His gaze wandered to the fairy and her companions. Interesting people. The fairy, in particular, caught his attention. Known for wielding the sword of speed, she seemed a worthy challenge. The others weren't lacking either. The red-haired one walked with silent confidence, ready to draw his blade at any moment. "They're worth cultivating," the swordsman mused, imagining them under his command. "What now? When things got complicated before, what did we do? We resolved it with brute force. Then do so again." The swordsman's gaze flickered to Incrid, noting the soldier's fair face and steady demeanor. Not so young, but interesting nonetheless. It felt like watching an excited kid gripping a sword for the first time. Showing such blatant fighting spirit. To claim it didn't stir something within would be a lie. When someone flaunts their confidence, isn't it natural for a swordsman to want to answer the challenge? "Please, I'm counting on you." The brown-haired man gave a slight bow before turning to Pollard, trying to calm him down. "Don't lose your temper. There's no need to worry. After all, if there's no evidence, it's over. Besides, once we're back in the city, whose side do you think the merchants will take? But what if they catch them? It'll still be fine." The brown-haired man smiled with his eyes, soothing Pollard's anxieties. Pollard remained uneasy but had no choice but to force a grin. "Trust me." Pollard squeezed out some courage and added, "Once we're back, it's over. Everyone is my father's man, so they'll all back me up. That harlot will be done for. If it's a shame to waste her, maybe I'll even take her as a concubine." "Would that really happen?" The brown-haired man thought Pollard was an idiot but kept it to himself. Leona silently observed the two. She couldn't hear the conversation clearly. The brown-haired man had faith in the strength of the enforcer. The enforcer, meanwhile, was entertaining the idea of whether knocking out the soldier flaunting his fighting spirit could lead to a fight with the fairy. Jackson overheard their conversation but paid it no mind. To him, it seemed like an act to put Pollard at ease. His only interest lay in acquiring Carmen's stiletto. Creyas. He hoped Creyas had successfully swayed the guild members. Jackson trusted him. Though Creyas was physically inept, his resourcefulness was exceptional. Having spent time together in the same unit, Jackson had seen this firsthand. There was no need for concern. If it doesn't work out, the dagger could always be acquired through other means. As Ingrid stepped aside to respect Jackson's peculiar hobby, Torres, having wrapped up the situation, approached him. "How have you been?" "No reason not to be fine." "True. Looks like we'll be wasting 2 days in this inn." Torres had a point, but was it necessary to idly waste time? Ingrid trusted Creyas to do his part. In the underworld, rules governed their domain, and it was best to leave matters to experts. Creyas was one of those experts. Why else would he have chosen to enter the Madman unit directly? There were many possible reasons, but the clearest one was simple: he didn't have to fight. The atmosphere in this unit was fundamentally different from others. Creyas had found his place and surely had a plan in mind when he decided to seize control of the guild. Ingrid believed in him. Sure enough, by evening, someone sent by Creyas arrived. "Is there someone named Ingrid here?" It was a boy, barely a teenager, his voice just beginning to deepen. Nervous, he glanced around, wary of his surroundings. A guard stationed at the inn motioned toward the interior. At that moment, Ingrid, who had been training in isolation techniques using the tables and chairs in the hall, stepped forward. Bare-chested, he draped a large cloth over himself as he walked out. The cold wind chilled the sweat on his forehead almost instantly. The air was biting. "That's me." The boy, dressed in a makeshift coat, stared at Ingrid and said firmly, "I have a message for you." The boy's tone was resolute. Ingrid pulled out a few coins from his pouch, sensing the boy's nervousness and figuring he could use some spare change. The boy's determined attitude left a favorable impression. However, the boy refused the coins. "No need. I'll receive my payment from the guild." Instead, he handed over a small note. It was an impressive gesture, one that suggested Creyas had a firm grip on the guild. A mere errand boy declining coins, remarkable. "Who is he?" one of the guards stationed around the inn asked as he approached. "He's from Creyas," Ingrid replied candidly. "What's he up to now?" Creyas was known for dabbling in various ventures, handling information, selling tobacco, and arranging courtesans. Hiring a kid for errands was nothing out of the ordinary. Ingrid returned to his room and unfolded the note. "Before the morning, 2 days from now." Though brief, the message was clear. Creyas would have their target soon. "What are you up to all day?" Torres asked as Ingrid tossed the note into the fireplace. "Training." "During a guard mission?" "It's not like anyone will attack us right now. And the client doesn't mind. As you can see." "Fair enough." Even Leona seemed unbothered, watching him with interest. Ingrid paid no attention to her or anyone else. Audin's advice echoed in his mind. Isolation techniques build your body like a fortress, one day at a time. Dedicate yourself today to lay the foundation for tomorrow. He admired how elegantly Audin had phrased it. Missing even a single day would be a disservice to himself. Ingrid was a man of resolve. He incorporated isolation techniques into his daily sword training. "Don't you ever get bored?" "Not at all." Watching himself improve day by day was exhilarating. The training helped him maintain his blade's edge and focus. The heart of the beast technique, however, wasn't something he could use lightly during training. As he continued his practice, shirtless once again, Torres commented with a smirk, "You must have no sense of modesty, being the daughter of a merchant family." Leona simply smiled lightly in response, her eyes fixed on Ingrid. His face, his body, and even the sweat dripping from his efforts, everything aligned perfectly with her preferences. Unfazed by the stares, Ingrid focused on his movements. Watching him intently, the ferry company commander asked Jackson, "Does he enjoy being the center of attention?" "Not sure," Jackson replied curtly. The commander didn't press further, her gaze returning to Ingrid. A well-trained body and a handsome face were always a welcome sight. Incrid gripped the chair's sides, lowering himself until his body hung below it before pushing himself back up, his forearm muscles flexing with each motion. As Torres observed, 2 border guards joined him. Is that him? The one who took down the curse? Yeah, that's him. Speaking loud enough for Incrid to hear, the guards chuckled. Incrid, finishing a cycle of his training, turned to Torres. Bored? How about a sparring match? With plenty of time to kill and a spacious yard behind the inn designed for mercenaries and swordsmen, it was an ideal setting for a friendly duel. Your lady's quite generous, Torres said, glancing at Leona. She nodded without hesitation. This should be entertaining. Her quick approval left Torres no room to object. The guards welcomed the idea even more enthusiastically. Isn't he supposed to be only high rank? You're up first, Captain Torres. This kind of thing starts from the bottom, right? The growing excitement pleased Incrid. Why not all at once? Thus began an unexpected sparring frenzy. To avoid turning the duel into something deadly, they snapped branches to use as makeshift swords, though everyone took the practice seriously. Count me in, said the company commander, joining the fray. By then, everyone in the inn had become spectators. They're insane, muttered one of Leona's bodyguards, shaking his head. Yet, with Leona's permission, there was no stopping them. Chapter 78, Painted with Passion. Torres still possessed outstanding skill. When sparring with him, Incrid lost 7 out of 10 bouts. Your skills have improved, Torres said, standing still and catching his breath. A sudden thought struck Incrid: what would happen in a real fight with sharp blades? He had no idea. Incrid was not the type to face battles with absolute certainty. No matter how skilled one was with a sword, a single stab to the heart from a 7-year-old wielding a dagger could end it all. Skill aside, the outcome of a life-or-death battle was impossible to predict. Do you think so? Incrid replied while lying flat on the ground. Then, he sprang to his feet. Next is me. Bring it on. Despite the season's cold breath visible in the air, sweat flew and heat rose in the clearing behind the inn. How had it come to this? Somehow, everyone was taking turns fighting Incrid. It was a series of sparring matches, a valuable experience for him. The frontier defenders, including Torres, excelled in unconventional combat techniques. That didn't mean their fundamentals were lacking. With a snap, a defender broke a branch and held a piece in each hand. My specialty is daggers. Be careful not to get hurt. He held 2 short sticks, each about half the length of a forearm. Let's both be careful. That's what I'm saying. Let's be careful together. The defender grinned. His smile radiated pure competitiveness, free of malice. Snap! Branches clashed, and Incrid engaged in another fight. After exchanging a few moves, Incrid expected his opponent to close the distance. Instead, the defender crossed his 2 short sticks to catch Incrid's sword, twisting it aside. Then, unbalancing Incrid, he threw one of the sticks, hitting him roughly in the torso. In a real fight, that would have been your eye, he remarked. This man was remarkable, almost on par with Torres. It became clear why the frontier defenders were given special treatment. Incrid silently nodded, acknowledging yet another defeat. It was time for a brief rest. Everyone naturally paused for a break. Leaning casually against the door connecting the clearing to the inn was Jackson. As Incrid stepped inside, Jackson spoke. If your opponent uses a dagger, you shouldn't be so focused on closing the distance. Just because your fundamentals are solid doesn't mean you should rely on them alone. When an opponent crawls toward you on the ground, is stabbing them with your sword the only option? Why not kick them instead? Whether Incrid won or lost, Jackson always had something to say. It was a teaching moment, though some might dismiss it as nagging. For Incrid, it wasn't. He listened carefully. I didn't expect him to use those tactics with daggers, Incrid admitted. His primary weapon is likely a sword breaker, Jackson explained. A sword breaker was a blade with a serrated back designed to snap an opponent's weapon. This man specialized in disarming opponents. It was good that you didn't give up your distance, but you should have prepared for what came next. Jackson reviewed the sparring session in detail. Incrid always gave his best effort. Had he allowed the defender to close the distance, he would have been overwhelmed. By maintaining the gap, he'd at least seen the sword breaker technique in action. You did well there, Jackson noted. Think about how to counter it next time. Training in swordsmanship basics, physical conditioning, and mastering techniques, all were important. But addressing situations that arose during sparring was a task only Ingrid could tackle himself. That was Jackson's advice, and Ingrid agreed. It took hundreds of repetitions for a movement to become second nature. To make anything his own, Ingrid had to ponder and review it. Reflection and study, these were Ingrid's true weapons. And so, he did. After the break, it's my turn. Another defender spoke, one skilled with both sword and kicks. He didn't merely step forward, he seamlessly incorporated kicks into his moves. Though challenging to face, each match was a learning experience. 6 defenders, including Torres, sparred with him in rotation. While their techniques shared similarities, they also showcased unique skills. Each had individuality, yet all excelled in the basics. There was much to learn. In the past, such sparring sessions might not have been as beneficial. It was inevitable, someone who hadn't climbed a mountain couldn't fully appreciate the view from the summit. But now was different. Focus on a single point more. The technique Ingrid learned from Ragnar shone through. It was only natural that the heart of the beast formed the foundation of his daring. Keep your senses sharp at all times, Jackson advised, emphasizing the need for constant vigilance. Ingrid nodded. As he wiped sweat from his brow, Leona approached. You must really enjoy this, she remarked. Enjoy what? Using a sword. Does it seem that way to you? Yes. Leona often struck up conversations, though they were usually trivial. To Ingrid, her manner seemed like a spider observing prey, never letting it out of sight. Though comparing her to a spider doesn't quite fit her looks. Anyone could see she was a stunning beauty. Is it because of the Fairy Company commander? You don't seem very sensitive to a woman's appearance. It's not entirely that. So, am I just not your type? What did she mean by that? Her playful expression hinted at mischief. A man who can ignore the beauty of someone like Lady Leona is rare, don't you think? Ingrid's roundabout reply conveyed his lack of interest. After their brief exchange, Leona smiled demurely and sat next to the commander. Be careful. He's got a way with women, the commander quipped. To this, Leona chuckled. Did she actually understand the fairy's jokes? The teasing that left Ingrid flustered only seemed to amuse Leona further. You're the wittiest fairy I've ever met, she said with a laugh. That's something I hear a lot. Where on earth? While preparing for the sparring, I almost twisted my ankle. As I sharpened my senses, their conversation reached me naturally, loud enough to be heard even without paying attention. We even have a child. Pardon? There are people in the unit who believe that. Wouldn't that deepen the misunderstanding if they said it like that? I was worried, but... Leona smiled and let it slide, whether she believed it or not. Won't you do it? Are you tired now? Ingrid pushed aside his worries as he glanced at those waiting for him. Rumors would spread regardless. Thanks to Leona's sudden confession earlier, even worse rumors would probably spread. The demonic squad leader. Those stationed outside often called him that. The demonic squad leader who destroyed the curse. The demonic squad leader who can't just leave women alone. He was starting to get tired of hearing it. Demonic squad leader, huh? Even Jackson had uttered the words. HM. Isn't it the case that the entire garrison is watching only the squad leader? Indeed, that's just how it happened. He had spent the whole day fiercely sparring. The awkward air that had settled around them at first was now gone. They had all bonded through swords and sweat. As a result, Ingrid had bruises all over his body. Does it hurt? When the one who struck him asked, Ingrid shook his head. No. The strike from earlier had been spectacular. He was replaying it over and over in his mind. He blocked the downward slash by feigning to block from below, using his forearm to deflect it. The split-second decision, the timing, the boldness, everything came together. What he had absorbed in that moment was an experience he had never had before. Ingrid was once again overcome with a sense of exhilaration. He was intoxicated by what was happening now. Sometimes, the platoon leader would step forward for something like wrestling. Now and then, Leona would also speak to him. How enviable. I should have learned that too, I guess. She said this after watching the platoon leader grab his own arm in midair and hang from it, putting pressure on the joint. In fact, Ingrid was busy trying to endure the technique by falling. Use wrestling. Soldier. The platoon leader chimed in with his own advice. Ingrid wasn't sure if it was because he had been listening to Jackson or if it was just out of goodwill. Even now, he didn't know why, but it didn't matter. Ingrid kept her listening posture, respecting the advice given to him. Your balance is a bit off. Who's watching your body conditioning? It wasn't just the platoon leader. The frontier defenders said the same thing. Aldin had said the same thing too, and now the border guards were echoing it. The imbalance in the left and right. Since he was right-hand, it was only natural, but the first step to reaching the limits of a human is conditioning the full body muscles. You have strength, though. Torres also gave some advice. You only thought of closing the distance with the dagger, didn't you? Try pulling them in closer instead. What do you think they do then? Imprint an evil spirit on their head. It was a way to confuse the opponent's mind. You have some bad habits. Trying to deceive the opponent is fine, but don't forget the basics. Where are you placing your center of gravity? They pointed out mistakes made during sparring. Ingrid wasn't sure how this all happened, but he was completely immersed in everything, listening attentively. It was different from sparring with his squad. Was this fun? Will you spar with me? Pollard's guard stepped forward. He unsheathed his rapier and placed it beside him, asking. Ingrid nodded instinctively. It was something he had been longing for. You're an interesting guy. Sparring like this during a mission. I value time very highly. During the escort mission, they had seen blood due to the succession issue of a large merchant family. Despite this, Ingrid grabbed his sword and swung it. He had to. Because the time of others was different from Ingrid's time. Those with talent and those without could never be equal. Thus, for those who needed to make up for what they lacked, there was never enough time. The rapier's owner found it fascinating. He doesn't grow his skills instantly. But he was a soldier with a charm to draw in those around him. Especially the change in the relationship between the border guards and Ingrid was intriguing. The wariness that had been there between strangers had melted away, and it dissolved into camaraderie. They had gained favor in an instant. It was a miraculous sight, even though it had unfolded right in front of him. A rare talent. But it wasn't his talent for swordsmanship that stood out. The owner of the rapier, a skilled fighter, could see that his current skill was at its limit. Ingrid's talent lay elsewhere. Having met many talents in his life, he could think of it clearly. If he had heard that Ingrid's dream was to be a knight, he would have immediately shaken his head. But still, despite his talent, I want to teach him. It was an endless passion. Every word, every action, was done with purpose. His talent might not be great, but he exuded a heavy, intense energy. He had a knack for inspiring those around him with his passion alone. Even the instructor who had taught Ingrid had felt something similar. Everyone knew it wouldn't work out, but still, they tried to impart everything they had to Ingrid. They taught and taught, never giving up. His passion and guts made giving up seem like a foreign word. Will you spar with me? That was what pushed him to speak up, to take the first step. Hey! His teammate, who had come along, looked at him in surprise. He was surprised too. He was an enemy, after all. It seemed strange to step forward here. And if the opponent rejected him, would it be even more embarrassing? But the truth was, he hadn't thought that way at all before he spoke. Ingrid nodded. Now. His arms were bruised, and his whole body was drenched in sweat. The cold wind blowing across the open area couldn't compare to the heat radiating from his body. Hot steam rose from his shoulders. He must have been tired. Winning or losing didn't matter. The point was that he was enjoying the sparring for what it was. Good. The swordsman spoke, almost unconsciously. Jackson was suspicious of his opponent's intentions. The platoon leader nodded with interest. All the border guards were ready to strike if anything went wrong. They weren't going to sit by and watch anything happen to Ingrid. And Ingrid. Quick sword. He was busy picturing his opponent's sword in his mind. How should he respond? What kind of fight would give him the best chance of winning? Could he win? Don't hesitate. REM had once said that those who fight with victory and defeat on their minds rarely survive. Instead of doubting the outcome, have confidence. That's the first step. Sharpen the confidence like a blade. The heart of the beast embraces boldness. Encrid raised the tip of his sword towards the sky. His hands gripped the sword as if to concentrate. In that moment, everything around him shifted. His focus blazed, turning the surroundings into the battlefield. He could see the armor around his opponent's body. He could see the thin sword in his hands. If he didn't dodge, he would die. At that thought, Encrid became fully absorbed.